Good morning. Joining me today is Will McLaughlin. Will is the Business Development Manager for ZICO Law. He's based in Thailand, but has responsibility for a huge region covering Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, I believe. I think, have we left anything out there, Will?
Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand.
Yeah. That's a pretty big region to cover. More interestingly, he's perhaps not more interestingly, but he's also the founder of the BD Roundtable, which is a private online community for legal marketers. And he's doing some absolutely fantastic stuff there. And I would urge everybody to check out his LinkedIn channel with some fantastic videos and resources there. One of Will's greatest passions is looking at the automation of marketing and business development in professional services firms. And he's kindly offered to share with us this morning some of his experiences there and some of the tasks that he's automated, some of the technology he's using, and also perhaps interestingly, some of the things that can't be automated. So Will, thank you ever so much for joining us. I have to admit I cannot remember what time of day it is in Thailand, but good morning or good evening. First off, what prompted you to start looking at automation at ZICO?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It is the afternoon here, so I'm 12 hours ahead of you, I believe. Yeah, automation. So I was coming from Baker McKenzie, in a BD role there, and as you may know, all the processes are kind of pretty much done for you. You're just there as a BD person to sort of plug and play and provide the credentials and the deliverables. When I moved over to ZICO Law, which is a smaller regional firm, I was starting to lead the business development teams, and I found that a lot of the internal processes weren't just as robust. So I was doing everything myself manually. I'm like, hold on, there are tools out there to help me get this done faster because it was just sort of me doing it. So that's really what prompted me on the whole automation journey and rabbit hole, if you will.
When you started looking at those tasks, what sort of tasks are we talking about here that were very easy to automate? And how do you sort of choose which tasks to apply some kind of technology to?
Sure. Well, my process for bringing in automation into the firm, and I did it kind of a semantic or systematic way. So the first thing I did was I just watched all the YouTube videos I could. So I had a good sense of all the tools, and we can talk about them later. But then for 1 month, I very diligently tracked everything I did and how much time it took. Just on an Excel spreadsheet, okay, I sent out this proposal, it took this much time, I did this, I did this, I did this. So I had a good sense of the tasks that I was doing. And I looked over those tasks and I figured out everything that I was doing again and again and again, that's the sort of stuff that could be automated. And there are different levels of automation, right? There's full automation, and then you have sort of a hybrid model where you just sort of automate the trigger function, and then you follow up just to relieve some of the mental power that it takes to remember to do things. And yeah, so I started doing that. So the early things that I automated, proposal trackers, so if I helped a partner, a lawyer with a proposal, that got added into our database like most firms do. And then I just set up an automation. Okay, if the status hasn't changed after 2 weeks, send me an email with the details, and then I'll follow up with the partner. And then if it hasn't changed in the next 2 weeks, follow up again. And then finally, if it hasn't changed after 1 month or whatever the designation time was, just mark it as unknown. So those sort of easy sort of reminder tasks were one of the first things that I automated.
Did you bring in specific technology tools? So for the example of proposals, did you bring in specific technology or tools to allow you to do that? Or were these tools that are fairly readily available through the sort of suite of software that most firms are using already?
Well, exactly. We already had the system and the tools available. We just weren't using them.
Yeah.
So we use Microsoft 365 at the Enterprise Edition. So most big companies probably use that, or Google.
Mm.
So if you have Microsoft 365, you can use their automation software called Power Automate. If you don't have that, Zapier or Zapier works very well. And there's also another solution called Integramate, which works really, really well. But I like keeping everything into the Microsoft environment because we use a SharePoint system or account. So all of the database that is housing all of those trackers and things are on SharePoint. And then we just link Power Automate to those. And we use Outlook for our email. So it works pretty well.
Yeah. Do you find in your experience, Will, that marketers and business development professionals in professional services firms fully understand the technology and the automation that is available to them, or is it still a little bit hit and miss?
Well, with the BD Roundtable, I've spoken to a lot of my peers, and they are aware that the technology exists, right? We kind of know that we can do this. The problem is, do I have enough time to stop and pause and set it up, right? They're so busy, pumping out these proposals, so busy working on the day-to-day, and they would say, oh, it would be nice to figure out how to do that. They just need to take a week or whatever, or take your lunch hour and just figure out how to implement it, because the technology is there.
And at ZICO, did you bring someone in to help you do this? Is this sort of a role that you've tasked someone in the team to explore and roll out, or is it something that you yourself have done?
Well, I'm a bit more tech-minded, and I found, like, when I kind of procrastinated, I would just watch automation videos, and so when I kind of feel the urge to procrastinate, I kind of do this sort of stuff, and yeah, I did it myself, and then we eventually rolled it out. We did it as a test pilot just for my countries that I look after, and then if it goes well, then we roll it out to the whole network.
And is it technology that you yourselves, sort of the processes you yourselves in the BD team are managing, or is it something that you've rolled out to your partners and Fiona and colleagues as well?
We started out with internal automation just to help the business development team. Because, when, let's say you have an event, well, we have the graphic designer who needs to do the graphics, we have the copywriter who needs to prepare everything. So we needed a way to not have to send multiple emails. So we set up an events tracker sort of thing. So when you put in a new event, emails get sent out to everyone automatically. So we did it internally, and then some lawyers said, hey, that's quite nice. How could we implement it in this practice group, or how could we implement it in other parts of the firm? So now we've sort of tested it out internally in the BD team. Now we're starting to, make it more accessible to the rest of the firm.
I mean, you've mentioned the suite of products that 365 offers. Is there any other technology platforms that you would have a look at or recommend people sort of explore and check out? I know a lot of the firms that we talk to have quite sophisticated CRM systems. Whether they use them or not, I think, is another point for discussion. But what sort of technology platforms would you suggest people explore and consider?
Yeah, so apart from the Microsoft software, the number one, I think, automation, relatively free software is Zapier. You get a certain number of free automations, so it's great to test it out. So if you're only doing one sort of thing, if you have a MailChimp to manage your contacts and you want to, put it into your CRM system, that would be easy to do and set up. So Zapier is probably the most widely known and has the most integrations with third-party apps. And then another alternative one to that, which I'm exploring right now, is Integramate, or Integramate. And that gives you more data processing, free. So I've been using that as well, sort of as a hodgepodge, mixing them together.
Uh,
But for like firm stuff that we want to make sure it's right, we stick with the Microsoft one, just because you don't have to rely on a third party. So.
And I guess actually maybe a piece of advice to someone starting wanting to explore this further is actually perhaps to explore some of these products themselves and check out some YouTube videos. I think sounds like a pretty good plan to me.
Well, that's how we do it nowadays, right? You just find a YouTube video to walk you through. There are times where I would spend like 4 hours pulling my hair out trying to figure out why this specific thing wasn't working. And then it turns out, oh, I just forgot to click a little button, So maybe having a personal someone to walk you through it. But yeah, don't be afraid. Watch YouTube videos, get your hands wet a bit, and you'll find what works and what doesn't. And
do you have to be a super conversive with technology to be able to do this? Is it sort of, I mean, most of us are now, but there are people like me that perhaps are a little bit more of a Luddite when it does come to technology. Is it do you have to be a bit of a geek to do this?
Well, I mean, on the iPhones, right, they have the shortcut apps. So that's an easy way. It's pretty much drag and drop. You just figure out what you want to do. Zapier is pretty much the same way. So the only sort of tech skill that you would need is to know how to find the integration key. They call it the API key, and you just sync that with the app. But after you do that, it's pretty much just drag and drop. If this happens, then do this. Now, it can get fairly complicated when you're doing loops and all this sort of internal stuff and creating folders. And if the folder starts with this initial, do this. That gets a bit complicated, and you need to have sort of a mind to be able to follow the logic, which for me can be a bit difficult. But no, it's very much drag and drop, and YouTube tutorials are good enough to get that.
And I suspect most firms have pretty sophisticated IT teams that you could always pick up the phone and get a little bit of help if you need it.
Absolutely. If you get stuck, call the IT team, say, hey, where do I find this? How can you help me with this? But I found that IT teams are not the best person to start out with, because they're sort of IT minded. They're not process oriented minded. So you as the BD person, you kind of know how you want the flow to work. So you need to set up the workflow or the automation flow. And then if you get stuck, ask someone to help you out.
Yeah. And a final question, Will, there must be tasks that don't really suit automation. The human touch is still important. In your experience, what sort of things have you decided not to automate?
Yes, that was a big lesson. So when I first got into automation, I wanted to automate everything, right? Automate all things. And then I found, because automation can go wrong, there's some triggers that just don't work. And if you're involving partners in those automations, then their emails might get flooded with unnecessary things. So the first thing is to be aware about is anything that's automated, you tend to ignore, right? So if you get something too frequently, you're just going to ignore it. So any of those sort of automations, be wary of. And then, of course, anything where that's involving partners, I tend to have the automation trigger to me, and then I'll just forward the information to the partner if it's necessary. But yeah, so just be wary of automating too many things, because the constant notifications will get ignored.
Well, thank you very much. Really helpful advice there. And hopefully it will encourage us all to go and do a little bit more with some of the tools that are, sounds like, very, very readily available. And if you want to find out a little bit more about the BD network, check you out on LinkedIn. Is that the best way?
Yep, head over to LinkedIn. You'll find me there. You also find the BD community at bdroundtable.com. We have weekly chats internal, and we invite interviewers and interviewees to talk about these sorts of topics.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Will.